Hi, my name is Mary Newsome. I used to be Mary Ann Roeper. So that today I'm going to be talking about the Roeper history. I've been with the parish all my life. I was born and raised here. My father was born and raised here. My grandparents were born and raised here. So that I'm pretty well established in the parish. And that's how I got here, was because of my family, through the family tree. Okay, what I have got here, when I found out I was going to be doing this, I found out that I had the St. Peter's Roeper family history, and it takes us all the way back to how my grandparents and them came over from Germany. So if you don't mind, I think I'm going to just go ahead and read it off. Okay, this is the St. Peter's Roepers, and this was published back in September 10th, 1975. Southwest of town are two subdivisions, St. Mary's and Westwoods, with 150 new homes. Not very long ago, the land was a farm where these three generations of Roepers lived and worked. Now only a large but distinctive old brick column, which is right down the street here, the old farmhouse, is there, giving mute evidence of the days that used to be. In 1889, the first Peter Roeper took possession of 150 acres and brought his wife and 4 children there to live in the old frame house. In time, his descendants sold 50 acres, and eventually 100 acres became the site of the two subdivisions. Emigrating from Germany in 1863 at the age of 18, Peter came to this country with 3 companions. Now that would be my great-grandfather. Joseph Knoll, Joseph Fredericks, and a Petzel boy. I don't know how, I guess it is P-E-T-Z-E-L. Peter's mother had just died. His father was in his 60s. There was a brother Joseph, a niece who became a Mrs. Petrush, and a number of other relatives by the name of Bruni. Though most immigrants never saw their homeland again, that was not true of Peter. In 1904, in the company of John Wilk, he had a trip back. Now this is my great-grandfather they're talking about. Today, only one of Peter's children is here to tell what it's like to live in the big red house on the Roeper farm. Youngest of the family, she is Lucy, the widow of Gregory Snyder. She has 2 married daughters in St. Charles, a son Harold of Cotterville, and another son Maurice of Warrenton, Missouri, whose former home is now the Lutheran parsonage on Cotterville Road. Lucy has a copy of the family history written in her father's own beautiful German script. What better can we do than summarize his words? His mother, now this was my great-grandfather, his mother, Elizabeth Busch Roeper, was born in Lippstadt, Germany on December 25th, 1798, and died June 13th, 1863 in Belek. Father Peter Roeper was born August 31st, 1809 in Belek, and died there September 26, 1878. His brother Joseph was born in Lippstadt on September 1st, 1835, and died there November 28th, 1908. Joseph's daughter, Franziska Roeper Petrush, was born on May 17, 1870 in Belek. The author, Peter himself, which is my great-grandfather now, entered the world on July 13, 1844 in Belek. He came to St. Peter's, Missouri, and married a daughter of Franz Schulte, Josepha, on May 28, 1878 in St. Peter's Church, St. Charles, Missouri. She was born on May 1st, 1856 in St. Peter's and died May 6, 1879. Their son Franz Joseph Roeper was born on April 17, 1879 and died June 5th, 1879. Mother and son were buried in the same grave in All Saints Cemetery. So evidently she died right after she gave birth to the boy, and he only lived about a month, it sounded like. No further entries in the family book for a few years. But Lucy knew that her father, saddened by the turn of events, had gone into St. Louis to pursue the trade he had learned in Germany, that of a mechanic and a locksmith. There he became acquainted with a young lady, the daughter of a dealer of kitchen stoves from Franklin County. Her name was Mary Wigman, and she became the second Mrs. Roeper. So this is my great-grandmother now. The entries in her family book resume with the birth dates of 4 children. They had Maggie, Henry, Peter Theodore, who is my grandpa, and Christopher. All were baptized at Holy Trinity Church in North St. Louis. The next 5 children born between 1889 and 1898 were baptized in All Saints Church in St. Peter's. They were Mayne, Teresa, Lena, Joseph, and Lucy. The death of Henry at the age of 7 was entered as of 1889. And in 1904, the eldest Maggie, who had married John Fetch, died. So as you're seeing, you're hearing different names from St. Peter's coming up in here.
All right.
Listed also are the first communion and confirmation dates of each child and the date and name of the mates of each one's marriage. So over their church somewhere in the archives, they've got all this stuff. So much for the family book. Just as precise was Peter's bookkeeping ledger. That's my great-grandpa. Also the possession of Lucy. Finding himself with a farm and no knowledge of how to go about working it, Peter hired the young Walter and Wendell Solomon to farm for him, and later he employed John Fetch and Frank Wilkie until his own sons became old enough to take over. There were all kinds of fruits, vegetables, grains, poultry, barnyard, and animals and houses. Everything had to be done just so. There was hoeing and pulling of weeds. There were 12 long rows of grapes. Lots of wine was made. They made a lot of wine. I remember that. So all the children had chores, and they worked very hard. Peter Sr. did the planning and overseeing and operated a tool shed where he kept all the machinery in perfect condition. In addition, he ran a custom baling business for other farmers. One of the family treasures is a printed sales ticket. It reads thus: Peter Roeper, hay and straw baling, St. Peters, Missouri, 1891. At one side is a 2-inch drawing of 2 horses encircling around the baling machine and 2 men with pitchforks feeding a hopper of the baler with a pile of straw. Very picturesque and beautifully done. All these operations were kept track of in Peter's ledger. He accounted for every penny that went out and every one that came in. Successful in those enterprises, he built a home on his land comparable to some of the best in native Belecke. I guess that's how you say Belecke in Germany. And the old house he used for a granary. So that means that's when he built this big brick house here. I mean, after he started making money from his dealings and that, then he built a bigger house for all his kids. The children did chores without question. When Papa talked, Lucy says, we walked. There was no arguing of hesitation. Her mother spoke German and English too, but German was her father's language, and all 8 children understood it well. Only Mom needed to punish them once in a while. Some of the hundreds of descendants of Peter and Mary today may be interested in this review of the history of each of the 8 of Peter's and Mary's children. When Maggie, who was the oldest, died, she left 2 small sons who were brought up by grandparents, the William Fetches. I didn't know that. Having only a hop, skip, and a jump to school each day, the boys were the envy of their schoolmates who had to trudge 3-4 miles through the mud and snow. And that's what, from the farmhouse here, as you know, all this was field and all farmland, and out here to all the way over to church. They had to go. So I had to do that too. Peter Theodore was, the Fetch boys grew up and moved to St. Louis. Some of their descendants have kept in touch. Now Peter Theodore and Clara Swendeman is my grandparents. They're the ones that I grew up with. On October 29th, 1907, they got married. Remained right here in St. Peter's. Christopher moved to Idaho, that's his brother, where he engaged in farming. He married and had children, and who kept in touch. There was a number of visits between the Iowas and the St. Peter Roepers over the years. Mayne, the last to be born in the old frame house in 1889, became the wife of Rix Omas. A number of their descendants live in O'Fallon and other parts of the St. Charles County. Teresa, who entered the world in the new brick house on October 21st, 1891, evidently she's the first one that was born in there, became wife of Albinus Arf, and a number of their descendants also live in the county. Getting all these names?
Oh my gosh.
Lena, born in 1894, became the wife of Felix Snyder and brought up a number of children in the O'Fallon area. A brother, Gregory Snyder, later wed Lucy Roeper, making a set of double in-laws. 2 sons of Tony Snyder had married daughters of neighbor Peter Roeper Sr. The Gregory Snyders moved to a farm near Cotterville. The youngest son, Peter and Mary, was Joseph. He began to work for the telephone company and moved around, but eventually he married Aretha Patterson of Jasper, Missouri, and settled down in Cahokia, Illinois. His children kept in touch too. Now, of this large family, the one which most of St. Peter's people know best is Peter Jr. and his wife Claire, which is my grandpa. And there are 11 children, and there was 11 children. At first, the young Peter Roeper lived and worked with the senior Roepers where their eldest Vincent was born. So they lived with them, I guess, for a while until Uncle Vinny, the oldest one, was born. Then they moved to the Bride's Farm in Cave Springs, where a son Frank made his appearance. Continuing to move around, they added Anna, Otmar, Elizabeth, Lawrence, my dad, and Isabel to the family. During these years, Felix Snyder was working the Roeper farm. However, when the elder Roeper died in 1920, as it had been his wish that Peter Jr., which was my grandpa, buy the place, Peter and Claire moved back with their 7 children there. There, Anthony, Helen, Mary Ann, Clarence were born. So they had 11 children. Grandmother Mary Roeper had been ill for a number of years after husband Peter's death. She stayed with her daughter Lena, Mrs. Felix Snyder, and her family until her death in 1932. So most grandchildren remember her well. Now, Peter Theodore was the full-fledged master of the Roeper farm. Having learned well, he succeeded too and added a dairy to the already full schedule. His children remember the chores both in the home and on the land without modern conveniences and machinery. Nevertheless, they look forward each year to the reasons for threshing and butchering. How much fun it was when there was so many jolly people around to help. The Swendemans, the Snyders, the Boscherts, the Kisters, the Illies, and other from time to time. It's fun to see how all of us kind of go back together. Yeah. In 1942, Peter and Claire retired from farming in favor of their children, and after several years built themselves a retirement home near Highway 70 on the northern edge of their land, which is up there right now along the service road, right next to the house where my dad built, where I grew up, up there. But there was no Highway 70 at that time, though. After intensive deliberation, Peter decided in 1954, well, that's when the highway was built, to lay out some building lots, 2 rows along the lane heading to the farm. So that's when they started building the roads that start coming this way. And the main one is called the Roeper Drive. That's called Roeper. And then there's, he called the street between them Clare Avenue, and then right there behind the house where they built, there's a little short street they called Clare. That was his grandma's name, in honor of his wife. And the entire area, St. Mary's, which he thought fitting because both he and Claire were very devout Catholics. Daughter Mary Ann says, I think maybe Mom and Dad felt the Blessed Lady would watch over the land they dearly loved and worked so hard to call their own. So this is called St. Mary's Subdivision. Oh. And it was the same Mary Ann and her husband Daniel Bud Arf who in 1954 built the first home in the new subdivision and lived there for a number of years. Soon there were others. See, when they did that, everybody in the family, I think, got a plot of land. Like they could build on it or they could go wherever they wanted to. A few of them built, most of them sold it. So that's how Mary Ann and them, they lived on Roeper Drive for a long time. And then my dad built the house up next to Grandma and Grandpa's retirement home up there. He built a small house up there. That's where I was born and raised. And it was, okay, in November of 1957, Claire and Peter Roeper celebrate their golden wedding anniversary. Delighted with the many friends who thought of them on that day, they seemed as happy as kids at their first birthday party, says Mary Ann. 2 months later, on January 27th, 1958, that's when I was 10 years old, Peter died and was buried at All Saints Cemetery. That's when Grandpa died. After a few years, Mrs. Roeper had more lots laid out in St. Mary's. Next, she sold the brick home place. That's when she sold the place, yeah. And the rest of the farm, which has become Westwood Estates. Though remodeled inside, the Roeper old brick home retained the same appearance as always from the outside. On December 31st, 1974, Clara Roeper died, and that would be my grandma, and was buried beside her husband, and their little retirement home near the highway was also sold. Now that's about the time, I think, when Dad he was building on he had like a little 3-room house he started up there. Now, of course, there are only memories for the children who live in easy visiting distance of their old home. They recall how much their father loved baseball. He liked to play it himself and was on the St. Peter's 1909 championship team. He loved to watch his sons play on the regular team and both sons and daughters on softball and second teams. He followed the game of the St. Louis Browns and of the Cardinals by radio and newspaper, and even often went to see a big league game himself. What a thrill it was for him one time to receive a ball hit into the stands by Bill Benedian. I'm not going to answer that, so don't worry about that. And carried on the sport that Peter loved so well. Clara Roeper loved parties. That's my grandma. With her daughter, she would roll up the rugs, move furniture, make benches of chunks of wood and long planks, and bake delicious cakes. Soon, friends, relatives, neighbors would come for an evening of toe tapping to the tunes of Father Peter's violin, which is my grandpa, and his son Vincent, which is his dad's oldest brother, mandolin, and the older Regina phonograph and roller records. Later came the cake and some of Dad's delicious wine. I remember tasting that wine when I was pretty little. Years after, when the little grandchildren came to visit, Clara would take their hands and dance around with them. On the Roeper farm, there was a dry part of the Dardine Creek and a wet part, and here's why. Once the creek made a sharp, deep hook toward the east. Tony Snyder and the Roepers decided to change that. One time, when the water was low, they dug up a new creek bed and built a new bank so that the water had to flow straight. Quite an operation for a couple of farmers. The banked-off loop had water seeping into it sometimes when the creek was high, and in the winter it was a fine place for ice skating. And I remember that when I was growing up, going down there skating all the time with my dad and them. I remember that a lot. Many people of the town remember the delightful skating parties at the Roeper Old Creek, so it was a town party thing too. And the big bonfires around which you sat, warmed by the flickering flames and by fellowship of fun-loving friends. And when there was snow, the Roepers had their very own slopes for sledding, make good use of them, which, where Westwood is, that was our sleigh riding hills.
Oh.
When they built Westwood, they flattened it out. I remember that too. In the summer, near the highway bridge, the wet creek provided a swimming hole where they would swim and splash in the cool water, and there was another sport, fishing. Tony, and it says his brother, but that was my dad, Tony and my dad, Lawrence Roeper, built a little log shack on the bank. They put in a wood stove and would fry their fish there. This is until the grease caught fire and burnt down the shack. It's funny. Another notable feature of the Roeper's Wet Creek is that there is a very pretty place in the creek bed where the water ripples over the big stones. The explanation, it was the ford over which the earlier Roepers drove in order to get to their 10 acres of land on the west bank. So evidently, where the creek is here, on the other side they had 10 acres too, and I didn't realize that. So they put stones in the creek in order to drive their wagons across. Loads of stone had been laid there to make it possible. There was timber over there which cut down and sold. Today the children have mementos, like wedding rings, little cannon made by Grandpa, a rocking chair, a signet ring, an old Victor record player without the horn, and their parents' rosaries beads. Every 4th of July, Grandpa's little cannon was brought out and made to shoot. It was a real miniature that worked, and that I remember too. Oh my gosh, it's bringing back memories. Besides these treasures, there are many memories. Their mother busy in her yard with the flowers she dearly loved, or praying the rosary, or saying to their father in German what she did not want them to know. The winter evenings when she taught the girls how to make patchwork quilts, a hobby which Mary Ann pursues today. One old saying of Mother Clara's when there was a boy or a girlfriend trouble was, "There's a lid to fit every pot." Though others thought their mother shy, she was really very jolly among her family and close friends, and girls. She always walked quickly, was quick to get in and out of the cars, and genuflecting and taking her place in the pew in church. Both she and Peter always taught the children to respect others, to work, play, and pray together. His rule was, if you don't have anything good to say about someone, don't say anything. Peter was a good disciplinarian, never needed to raise his voice. He just looked at an offender hard. But one cardinal offense he could not abide was waste. Just pull off a bunch of grapes before they were ripe, and punishment was swift and sure. He liked his grapes. Say those who had reason to remember. Both father and mother had their worries during World War II. When 4 of their sons and 2 son-in-laws were in the service all overseas, Lawrence, was my dad, and Otmar were wounded in action and received Purple Heart medals. Since the recent death of Clara Roeper and the sale of her home, the children have a deeper feeling of break with their past. Although Lawrence and Clarence still live on the farmer Roeper land, which this is back in 75, so my dad's not here anymore, but they are only the owners of their little lots, 2 among the 150. When once they roamed, worked, played ball, sleigh ride, romped, swam, fished, hunted, now other people live. Clarence, of course, is known as Boots, a name he got from walking through the fields to school in mud and snow with his brother's boots on. In his day, there were only fields between his brick home and All Saints, no road. It is now a tradition for all the Peter and Clara Roeper descendants to gather at some park each summer for a family reunion. Besides the 11 children and their mates, there are 36 grandchildren and 51 great-grandchildren, which there's probably many more by now. Thus, they keep in touch and share the memories of the good old days on the farm and the strict but devoted mother and dad who taught them so well.
That's really great.
I thought this was a really, I got to reading this and I thought, oh my gosh, I forgot about a lot of this stuff. And I didn't know about all this stuff in the beginning. I didn't even know it.
That's great.
But I thought that was really, really cool.
That is wonderful.
But now, like I said, I go back to the house up there. When my dad built that house next to Grandma and them up there back in the early 50s, he built him and Mom got married in 1946. And I was born in 1947, and I know I was born when they were living in St. Charles yet. But then right after that, they moved into their house, I guess about 47 or 48. It was just a little 3-room house. It had I guess a kitchen, living room area, and then a bedroom. A kitchen, living room, a bedroom, and a little back porch that Mom had her old ringer washer on. It was just a real little house. And and then it had an outhouse. We had no bathroom. When I was little, I had to go to the bathroom. I didn't like that at all. I remember that. But then back, I guess in 1953, that's when Dad added on 2 big extensions. He built a living room and a kitchen, a huge living room kitchen with a basement. And then the other rooms all became bedrooms, and then where the porch was, he made a bathroom. And then he dug out underneath of the old house, and that's where Mom put her old ringer washer back under there. So I remember helping her do a lot of laundry back then. And then when I was in 1st grade, I remember my dad, he circled a path by a fence going up to our church from up there to the service. Or the path, there was a fence, I guess, and he circled me a path to walk to school up there so I could get to school.
So you went to All Saints?
Mm-hmm.
So did you come in at the base of the stairs?
No, we walked through. When we walked through, you're coming up Gaddy Drive there, I guess, and it's up on the hill right across from where the crematorium is. The house is up there. We came in from the back of their house and came down their driveway. But at that time, I don't know those houses were there, so I guess it was a field, and I just walked through it. But later on, I remember always walking through there, coming down through there. And of course, from 1953 is when some of the houses started being built, so we watched all these houses up here be built. And in 1954, I was in 3rd grade. I watched them build Highway 70. I sat out in my front yard and watched them build Highway 70.
I'll bet that was really
it was something.
Wow.
And a lot of my memories are of, the ice skating on Doc Snyder's pond up there off of Highway 70 and 79 up in there. There was Doc Snyder. I guess it was the doctor around town back then. He had a pond, and all the St. Peters would go there and Sunday and skate. And have those big bonfires. And the sleigh riding back here on the hill. And the family Christmas get-togethers in the old farmhouse when everybody they play their mandolin and their violin and all that stuff and sing, and I remember all that. And it was just really good. And watching Dad and his brothers when they were ice skating play hockey. They loved to play hockey when they ice skate. So, I mean, that's kind of my.
What are your memories about the parish and going to school and?
Oh, okay. Well, I went there when I was. Of course, it was just a little. Well, my dad went to school there too, grade school. I guess my grandparents did in the little old country building then, but the school that there is now, Dad went to school there, and upstairs there was just like a big auditorium where they had Christmas plays every Christmas, and they have different get-togethers up there, and they had 2 rooms before you got to those, and that was high school. So Dad went to high school. You only had 1st year high and 2nd year high, and after that there was no more high school for you. So I remember Dad doing that, going to high school, but by that time I went to school, that was made into classrooms. there's classrooms up there. And no, when I was little there wasn't. I guess it was made into classrooms when I was about 4th grade. Because when I was little, I remember being in I was an angel in one of those plays. I remember being up there. But yeah, I went all 8 years there. My dad went all 8 years there, a couple of years high school. I guess all my grandparents around here, they went to school somewhere, I guess some little country building somewhere. They never mentioned where they went. Because I know the Catholic Church for a long time was down there along the creek down below before they built this one up here. So, yeah, I know we all went to school somehow, but I went all of my years there. But I didn't go to Catholic high school. I did go to Fort Zumwalt. I was the 3rd class to graduate Fort Zumwalt.
But you would have gone to the sacraments
Oh, yeah.
there?
Oh, yeah. I've done all my sacraments there.
Married in church?
Married
in that
there.
building?
Yeah. I was married there. Mom and Dad weren't married there. They were married at a church down in St. Louis where Mom was born and raised. Because she comes from a German family too, the Gunthers. As a matter of fact, the Gunthers lived out here too. But when Grandpa, there was like 8 kids, and he was the only boy out of 8 kids. And he decided he was going to go down to St. Louis and drive a streetcar. And that's where he met Grandma down. I mean, he took Grandma. They got married out here, though. And so my grandparents all got married out here, too. Mom's the only one. Mom and Dad didn't get married out here. They got married at St. Barbara's in St. Louis. But then the rest of us all got married out here again, too. Even all my brothers and sisters basically got married in that church. So, yeah, it's a very old,
Yeah, long line.
long
Wow.
history.
That is.
I know.
just
What's your
fantastic.
funnest memory of the school or the parish growing up?
Oh my gosh, a lot of the activities we used to have, like that play. We used to put on those plays. They had those plays, and I know. I enjoyed them. I mean, all the friends I met. I mean, probably a lot of them were like these fetches and that. A lot of them go back to the Illies. Joan Illy was my best friend in school. I didn't realize our families went back so far. Illy. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was just a good place to be. Country school. It's like a country school yet. There wasn't that much around here. Because I graduated in 61 is when I graduated school. Graduated high school 65. So, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
that's right.
Wow.
So it's,
Wow.
So,
I do like All Saints. I mean, like I said, I go any place else, it's just not like the same. I have to always come back to All Saints.
Yeah, I know what you
I think
mean.
matter of fact, one of the glass windows at the door coming in the side of the sacristy has got my Peter T, my great-grandpa's name on it. He donated that. Peter T. Roeper.
Roeper, okay.
Yeah.
As you come up the steps?
Coming from school over to come on and up steps. That's that window that's right there.
Huh.
It's got his name on the corner.
See that all the time. I didn't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
That was because I know a lot of the old timers. I mean, when they were building that church, I think they donated, money to help get the windows and stuff, so they put their names on them.
Yeah, that's great. So what do you love about being a Catholic?
Oh, I don't know. That's all I've ever known, and I mean, it just makes me feel good. I mean, like I said, there's a couple of years there where I was living in O'Fallon, and I didn't go all the time because it's so far, and my kids were little. They were like 2 and 3. It was hard for me to do, and I missed it. I mean, I had to be sure I come back to it. I mean, it's just everybody's just so friendly and good people.
Yeah.
Just love it.
Yeah, that's great.
I think I could be anything else.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything particularly, any one thing that you'd like the other people in the parish to know that you haven't talked about already? Just one big memory.
Oh,
No.
one big memory that I haven't talked about? Well, our church picnics out at the old picnic grounds.
Ah,
Oh, we used to love that. I mean, we would always, in school, I remember this, when we were in school, school kids would march out there as a school to the picnic grounds.
now was that the picnic grounds?
Off of Mexico
Mexico
Road.
Road. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And we loved to do that. And then as I got older, of course, after I got married, I helped Mom be in charge of the kitchen at the picnic a couple of times. And when I was out there, the problem is you always had to go over to school a couple of days ahead and pack up all the dishes and that you needed and make sure you got that stuff out there, and besides getting the food, and there was a lot of work to it. But it was a lot more fun than being over at church. Everybody says that. We miss those old picnic ground picnics. I said, yeah, I do too. I do too.
Yeah.
I miss them.